Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We are now about to begin a panel on the Global Standards Mapping Initiative, driving the next wave of blockchain adoption. Please feel free to enter questions in the Q&A tab under the chat. Our moderator, GBBC CEO Sandra Rowe, will take them, time permitting. And without further ado, I'll hand things off to Sandra. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, first of all, to the GBBC team for a fantastic morning. We started in Asia, and now we are crawling across through to the US afternoon now on the East Coast. I want to thank my esteemed partners in the GSMI, Global Standards Mapping Initiative. We'll explain exactly what that is in a second. But before we do, I really want each individual partner to talk about who they are in terms of what role they play in their institution and why standards are important in order to drive mass scale blockchain adoption and growth. So if I could please start with Samayda, could you give us obviously a very short intro and your thoughts on standards?
Thanks, Sandra, and thank you so much to the GBBC team for a great event so far. My name is Samayda, and I'm a platform curator at the World Economic Forum. So I work across a number of initiatives, including with our Global Blockchain Council, which is very similar to the title of GBBC. And that's where this initiative was born on our side. I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. And I think what we saw as the importance of standards and mapping this out is really how do we create a roadmap for interoperability and making systems that are working for the end user and really protecting those user rights. So I think these are foundational and excited to dive in.
Great. And over to you, Mariana.
Hi, my name is Mariana Gomez de la Villa, and I'm the Global Program Manager for ING. And we actually joined this standard group as well because we realized that while we were deploying solutions, for example, to production, a lot of the times, when you would have to pass on approvals, for example, with regulators, pass on approvals with your own risk areas, they would have different conceptions and different understandings of a specific taxonomy, for example, or specific synthetics as well, right? So maybe not the format of the data, how was that going to pass, etc. So we saw that across asset classes was as well a different understanding on those definitions and those terms, and therefore we really, we're trying to cooperate with the World Economic Forum in order to try to drive this standard adoption across the globe.
Fantastic, thank you so much. And over to you, Lawrence.
Oh, thank you, Sandra, and thanks for the invite. I am Lawrence Wintermeyer, and I am the executive co-chair of Global Digital Finance. Global Digital Finance is a crypto digital assets members association with over 200 members focused specifically on developing conduct standards for the crypto and digital assets sector. We've been running now for 3 years and broadly have a model where with our members and extended community, we crowdsource codes of standards, codes of conduct, and standards. We've currently got 12 codes in force adopted by almost 100 firms and do various crypto and digital asset white papers, including tax, areas particularly around market integrity and market surveillance. We're delighted to be part of this project, and we've baselined our own Global Industry Association map, and we're very fortunate to have Sandra Rowe on the GDF board.
Thank you, and the honor is all mine, and I appreciate, we're going to delve into a bit more about how GDF fits into this initiative as well, but I want to hand it over to Justin from Accenture to please talk about his role.
I appreciate it. Thank you. And it's fantastic to be here. So my name is Justin Herzig. I'm with Accenture. I am our global blockchain research lead. Have a team of researchers that really takes a business and data approach to understanding this area better and helping our clients really realize their journey through this technology. Specific to this work, I think the topic of cross-industry standard discussions is very important to Accenture, given the role that we play with clients across sectors. So for this ecosystem to truly grow around this technology and organizations to have confidence in the future state of interconnectivity, interoperability, the technology, agreeing to and establishing these standards is really foundational to success. And I think this team has done a fantastic job of really laying that initial groundwork and starting the discussion, really getting that open collaboration with not only the people who have been involved early on, but everyone that is listening to this and our larger ecosystem going forward.
Thanks very much. And Benjamin, over to you.
Hi guys, Benjamin Netareski here from Six Digital Exchange. And so for those not familiar, Six Digital Exchange is a wholly owned entity of Six Group, which is Switzerland's national stock exchange group. And Six Digital Exchange primarily is focused on two key pillars in the digital asset world, and that's a regulated institutional digital asset exchange and a regulated institutional digital asset CSD custody function for several different digital asset projects. My role there, I oversee the corporate development and strategic investment function for the company. And so with this, standards are so important to our business specifically is because we work with a number of clients globally, all leaders in the digital asset space and the financial institutions. All of these siloed projects, all of these siloed efforts, we're trying to group together and really bring onto the exchange and CSD functions to allow them to get the global stage and access that they need in the digital asset space. And the only way to do that is to ensure that the standards and models around the digital assets that both us and the clients that we work with are on the same page. And so the GSMI effort is core to that function to rope in all of these siloed efforts and initiatives across institutions, across assets, across launches, issuances across the world, and bring them in so that we all look at the same standards and models together. And so this is a very crucial function in our opinion.
Great. Well, first of all, I want to thank all of you guys for that introduction. And let's get into what GSMI is. So the Global Standards Mapping Initiative is a special project that we started actually in 2019, but really launched formally in 2020. The context of this is membership driven and our community driven. I actually thought, to be very frank with you all, that standards were being designed and put out, and frankly, it was all being worked on. So there was no need for this kind of initiative. However, the feedback, overwhelming feedback, was that we have fragmentation. We have bodies of work being done in various topics, whether it's technical, legal, regulatory, business consortia. And frankly, there is no single place where anyone can find all of this information. So the project is pretty simple. We have taken our partners have worked very hard to help put this together. We have a much wider group of partners than just here, but we have globally pooled together a version 1.0 of all the countries from a legal and regulatory standpoint. And that includes what the central bank may have done or any government agencies, et cetera, to a list of over 300 business consortia, to the technical piece, which has really been led by WEF and MIT, ING, and a number of other partners. And so with that, we will be launching in about a month's time, not only a set of reports with our findings, but we will also be creating a landing page and an interactive map that will allow you to navigate and use the data set completely openly and freely. And this is available to everyone in the community. I'm going to ask Samayda to just talk a little bit about the genesis of how the technical standards project and initiative came about, as well as to Mariana. So just to keep things a bit organized, WEF and ING, MIT, and other partners have really worked on the technical standards mapping. And then we've got Lawrence, GDF, Accenture, SDX, GBBC, the Milken Institute, and a number of other partners who've really focused on the legal, regulatory, and business consortia piece. So Samayda, please tell us a little bit more about the technical report that's forthcoming.
Absolutely. Thanks, Sandra. So this came out of a meeting of our Global Blockchain Council, which met in the spring of last year. And one of the key areas of focus for that meeting was determining what are some of the biggest governance gaps that are standing in the way of the adoption of the technology and specifically the responsible adoption of the technology. And one of the core gaps that was identified across this multi-stakeholder group of academics, private sector, policymakers was standards and interoperability. How are we really thinking about making sure that this technology, like I said, is working for end users? We're avoiding issues like vendor lock-in, and very key to that is technical standards. Like you said, we got the feedback over and over again that there's so much work being done in this space, but a lot of the activities are not communicating with each other, are not aligned with each other. And when you're talking about things of a technical nature and talking about interoperability, that interaction is essential. Nothing's going to move forward without a common understanding of these fundamentals at a technical level. So that was the motivation for really thinking from a technical perspective, what's going on in the space. And what we found is, there was a lot of excitement and a lot of activity to undertake these initiatives and to map out these initiatives during the peak of hype in 2018. But we haven't really taken stock of what's happening and what's moving forward, how they're moving forward since then. And so I think this is the perfect opportunity as we think about blockchain technology scaling to take a critical look at what's out there, what have we accomplished, and where do we need to go in order to achieve some of these very fundamental aims for the tech.
Fantastic. And Mariana, before I hand it over to you to talk about a little bit more about the business challenges that you definitely ran into with not having proper standards out there. I want to give a shout out actually to Brian Bellendorf from the Linux Foundation Hyperledger for actually connecting all of us, because he and I were talking, and this is the importance of this community talking together, because I mentioned to him, hey, we're thinking about doing this standards mapping. What do you think? And he said, oh, are you talking to WEF? Because they're doing the same, similar thing. And then it turned out you guys were actually focusing on the technical. And we brought this project together. I think it's a beautiful thing. I want to thank Brian for that. He was speaking on another panel, but he sits on the WEF's council, and Hyperledger is also a observing member of GBBC. So he was able to actually create that bridge. And what Samayda said was absolutely critical. Even though we're all working diligently and it's great, if we keep creating information silos, that is not going to help this community. And so the fact that we do have connectors in our network that help bring together this kind of information allows us to do what we've done now, which is to collaborate on a much bigger scale. So Mariana, if you could talk a little bit about, not only your research on the technical side, working with WEF and MIT and other partners, but also how you think some of these business challenges in the banking side will be facilitated by mapping these standards out and then aligning what the gaps are.
Thank you very much. So as you mentioned, it's essential actually that you have a common understanding of certain terminology, for example, so you can really reach a scale. But besides that, and before that, actually, you have to undergo, as you can imagine, as a financial institution, we have different entities in different parts of the world. And besides that, we serve different industries as well, right? So, for example, we serve the trade finance industry, financial markets, lending, etc. And each one of them has its own set of requirements. So when you are thinking about, okay, I'm going to tokenize this type of asset class, you have to think about what taxonomy are you going to use, what type of feature are you going to put in that specific token, how is the token going to move along the chain, if you need a specific interoperability, how are you going to handle the identity, how are you going to make sure that you pass also your own security requirements, etc. So this starts getting complex really easily. And if you really don't understand and you don't really speak the same language, then you will not be able to create the adoption and the network effect that you're looking for. You will not be able to create actually or streamline, for example, specific business models. You cannot scale. And therefore, we thought, it was really, really important to start actually talking to each other. And indeed, as you mentioned, I think that the World Economic Forum has been an amazing partner in that because they have introduced us to a lot of different partners as well. But I must say that I find that this specific industry, the ecosystem of blockchain actually is quite open as well. and it's quite collaborative. So, for example, we are also working with other companies like Microsoft, like R3, like you name it, Enterprise Dream Alliance, etc., to create actually a specific taxonomy, not only for digital assets, but as well for smart contracts, and that can vary as well, or can compile the different requirements that different industries may have. So this is not only for the financial industry, but it also goes above and beyond that, right? So that's why we actually allocated resources to this. We thought it was of essential importance, because otherwise I cannot deliver upon my promise. I cannot deliver upon the value that I think this technology would bring to ING and the financial ecosystem.
Well, there you go. There's a bottom line and growth reason for why standards are so important for us to arrive at some form of consensus. I'm going to flip the conversation a little bit, and I'm going to flip it to Lawrence. We're still going to stay in the financial services realm, only because I would love Lawrence's view on what he's seeing as feedback from the community from a fintech standpoint, and also why the legal and regulatory mapping was so important. I mean, from our point of view, we've managed to now map 130 countries, and that to us is probably one of the most comprehensive mappings out there. And I want to emphasize one thing to anyone who's listening. This is version 1.0. We hope, and the reason why this is completely open is that others will build. And we know of a lot of other groups that are building, that are making standards right now and creating standards right now. We want that to be additive. And so this is us just laying the baseline of what we have gathered. And we also want a almost, Wikipedia-like correction, feedback on things that we might have gotten right the first time. We have a lot of law firms looking at this, but still, we might not have gotten it all right. Lawrence, could you talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing, how you're viewing this, especially from a financial services standpoint, but beyond?
Yes, thanks, Sandra. I think the part two of your very first question, we've developed conduct standards with the community, for the community, and by the community in an open, inclusive, not-for-profit. And one, digital is global. So we're in, certainly in crypto and digital assets, with an absence of regulatory clarity and the fragmented regulatory perimeter between decentralized cryptocurrencies or DeFi assets through to centralized assets and asset tokens. It's a fairly difficult space to navigate. And so to what end, what does a conduct standard do? Well, when we started a few years ago, when tokens were all the rage, the conduct standard was something that firms could adopt, and typically earlier stage firms, not institutions, to say, look, we're abiding by jurisdictional laws, we're doing the right thing for our customers. It's safe to come into the pool with what it is we're doing on our exchanges, what we're issuing, our role in the ecosystem. Whether you're retail or in a professional market. And so that safe to safe to go in the pool stamp was ultimately the attestment of, in our experience, members being able to say, not just to customers or counterparties, but to staff, shareholders, look, we're trying to do the right thing here. And then we found, and I know that many of us on this call have found that the important dimension of industry leading this is that we've had to help and work in a constructive way with regulators to upskill them. And Sandra, from my days at Innovate Finance, I'm a big fan of working with regulators, mainly in that we're trying to get everyone in the community to identify, any of the technical risks, the systematic risks, or the financial risks with a lot of these things that we're doing, a lot of these products, the protocols, the infrastructure, early enough so that we've all got an opportunity to make them better, and to what end? To drive the utility, to ultimately be able to get greater products out that are more cost effective, that have got greater degree of transparency. And so I think broadly, in line with most of the other folks on this call, it's been exchange, custody, and AML KYC, custody settlement AML KYC, which have been the pretty big areas. And so, well, what are we seeing in the particular area that we've been focused on in the project? And I would concur with your earlier statement. We were surprised. I mean, there just aren't a lot of standards there, whether it's technical standards or conduct standards. There's certainly a large number of folks trying to do well, associations that are certainly doing outreach and advocacy work or working with regulators. But I think this initiative is important to baseline the landscape and, again, try to encourage organizations come together to help accelerate this, demystify, myth bust some of the things that are kicking around the community around the way that this works. And I think increasingly in a political and economically volatile world where we're seeing isolation come back up, that just doesn't work with digital assets. You can't sit in a supranational or a regulator and say to us in industry, you need to help us, work around all of this arbitrage that's happening, and end up with a regulatory roadmap that actually permissions actors in the community to arb the whole system or do things outside of the system. So I think that this initiative is critical in laying the baseline. I think it's critical in bringing the community together because we're better incented to participate, particularly as industry and agencies, and to work with supranationals and regulators. We're better incented to cooperate and make this work, to drive the liquidity and to make things safe than to not. If we don't collaborate, the industry will get decimated one way or another from regulators walking around with big sticks.
You just painted a very scary picture there. Thank you, Lawrence. Yes, let's all work.
I didn't paint a particularly scary picture. I was trying to be practical, but
no, you're being absolutely practical. Ben, I'm going to turn it over to you because you represent not only SDX, but a region, country that has led the way. And it's not just because GBBC is based in Switzerland as well, but Switzerland really has, in many ways, set a really great model for how governments can look at taking something very novel and helping to put guidelines around it, rules, laws, and actually help create and grow a new industry. Ben, we'd love to get some of your thoughts on that.
Absolutely. So from Switzerland's perspective, one of the key things that they've been able to implement, which allows for the adoption of crypto and digital assets more formally, is a very highly developed framework around DLT-based assets and recognizing them in a similar way and similar functions so that it's not a huge vertical leap for a completely new set of models and rules for the DLT space. The Federal Act on Intermediate Securities in Switzerland allows for CSDs, custody functions within Switzerland, to enable them to recognize these digital assets in-house, directly regulated through FINMA, the regulator in Switzerland. They've been highly adaptive in this model, and as a result, we've seen banks from Switzerland be leaders in the digital asset space, with players like UBS and Credit Suisse coming out on the forefront of several different projects and initiatives, as well as Crypto Valley, which Switzerland has promoted, which has allowed for a number of startups, a number of crypto-focused communities to evolve, addressing each of the different lifestyles of the crypto asset and crypto markets. Now at SDX, we are specifically focused on the institutional digital asset space, and Switzerland couldn't have been a better home for us to be able to push this initiative. And the goal is not just Switzerland, to be very clear. And the future of these digital assets in the institutional digital world, democratization of access to financial assets and financial products is one of the key features that will evolve from this. It's not so much focused on this decentralized push. The decentralized push works great for more of a retail side, for more of the day-to-day life and more of the crypto-focused initiatives. But when you look at actual digital assets, one of the key breakthroughs for the general population will be direct access. One of my favorite examples of this is access to, for example, if you tokenize art, high-valued art pieces. Wouldn't you like to invest in a Picasso over X amount of years rather than the S&P for the 10th time in a row? You can diversify your allocations in your portfolio accordingly and really give access to that an everyday investor that would never have access to so many different types of products. And so Switzerland's creating that framework. They have several different laws in place that have been very adaptive, and FINMA has been one of the leading progressive regulators in that regard in order to push these regulations through. And we're happy to be a part of it.
Yeah, and Ben, you raise an excellent point. We highlight in the report a number of different countries' models. It's not just about one or two, but we've taken a snapshot across, as we said, 130 different countries. And it is actually amazing how many have borrowed from each other and actually copied and pasted certain parts and then localized it and tailored it to their local laws or various constraints.
It's so true, absolutely. And when you look at the institutional space as well, when you look at that adaptive model, one of the key pieces of why the GSMI effort is so crucial here is because of the fact that all these siloed projects are on several different ledgers, several different technology bases, several different platforms. And every single person is going about this in a slightly adjusted way. Now, we don't see ISIN numbers being adjusted and SWIFT routing being adjusted on every single transaction. That's just not how financial institutions on the institutional side are going to function. And so the GSMI effort, my vision for the end goal of this initiative will essentially be to reach a point where we can point to a single source of truth for key features of things like digital bonds and digital equities and core pillars of the financial marketplace to allow for those key identifiers to be recognized and the standards in which to promote them, whether that's on ERC-20 contracts or Corda contracts or Hyperledger, whatever it might be, that you have a standard to look to, so that enables that access even further.
Fantastic. And with respect to business consortia and associations, Justin, you, as the global head of research for blockchain at Accenture, did tremendous work helping us. And I also want to give a shout out to ESG Intelligence, who's our partner, who have basically graciously allowed for us to list, along with the list that Accenture has developed. We will be listing every single business consortia association that we've collected. And guess what the number is, guys? Can anyone guess? I was shocked. Something like over 300. Did you know there were over 300 blockchain business consortia out there or associations? It's shocking. It just shows you the fragmentation we've got, which is like good and bad. Justin, give us some of your thoughts. And sorry I gave away that number, but it was a shocker to me.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I mean, the magnitude of it is what really continues to fascinate us. But it all started at the very beginning. A few years back, we, early in this process, realized that in order to be successful in this space, you can't work in silos. And so we really are believers of the term of a minimal viable ecosystem, where you start off with, connecting with people that have similar goals, similar business objectives with you. And I think that's what's led to so many of these consortia. And you see the wide range. You obviously have your more technical, very large focused ones that have similar goals around standards, around technology development. You have some that really originated out of education. Maybe they're in this vertical and they come together with their partners and to better understand what this technology is and what the opportunities are. And then often that turns into maybe working groups that actually take this to fruition in production. And then you have that third one where, you get more of a couple people that come together. Maybe it's a supply chain that already has the relationships and existing processes or existing ideas and figuring out, okay, what can we do to really advance a product? And none of this works in silo. When one company has a brilliant idea, it might work for a technology like artificial intelligence or maybe with quantum in the future. But especially when it is so innate in this technology, the idea of decentralization, the idea of togetherness, the idea of open, and those core foundational building blocks are what really excite us. And I think, I think of what Satoshi Nakamoto did is putting together a very challenging puzzle. He combined together previous developments such as cryptography, distributed databases, peer-to-peer networks, etc. And you built Bitcoin. But we then see people taking that puzzle and tweaking it a bit, creating these other public permission networks. And now a lot of organizations and groups are really looking at those puzzles and finding significant value in certain pieces, often combining them with pieces we hadn't even considered before to create something new. And this type of evolution I've seen where, we've been able to develop these multi-party systems that can leverage the wide range of technologies, inclusive but not exclusive to only blockchain technology. And I think that's where we're going to continue to see a lot of this development. And through these types of consortia, these companies, organizations coming together is where the most progress and success is being seen.
Thanks very much for that. And I'm going to switch gears a little bit back to the technical side of the report that will be forthcoming. Samayda and Mariana, would you be able to highlight for us just a couple key findings that so far we know the report's still in the works, but I know we've shared some drafts back and forth on both sides of the fence. Just there are a few things that just kind of struck you guys that are worth mentioning to the group as a teaser. And hey guys, if you're interested, follow us, and we will be announcing mid-October the release of all of that information. So stay tuned. Samayda.
Yes. And I'll hand over to Mariana to expand, but I think we're unfortunately still seeing a lot of fragmentation in terminology and the way we're defining the tech stack, which is really fundamental to everything that we're talking about here. So we saw, as we evaluated the technical standards and the work that's being done, the reference architectures that are being created, that they're different from institution to institution, and that's going to cause really big issues down the road, especially because all of these technical standards build upon each other and reference each other. So even the slightest differences and reflective of philosophies really around the technology will ultimately have ripple effects for the way that technical standards are developed further down the line and have serious implications for interoperability and key aspects that would be enabled by the technical standards side of things. The other thing is just thinking about the models of creating standards and how decentralization upends some of the traditional ways that we've seen technical standards being developed. So obviously, with new governance models enabled by blockchain technology, we're going to have to rethink the way that these standards are both developed and implemented. So we're seeing work, at the protocol level through improvement proposals that are really driving a lot of the
Guys, can you tell me, did you lose Samayda or did I?
Lost as well.
Yeah, Mariana, can we hand over to you on your thoughts of some of the findings in the technical report? I mean, clearly fragmentation is like headline, we still have a lot of work to do. Any thoughts that you have coming out of the report that's worth mentioning here?
Yeah, I think this conversation actually comes in a really good time, right? As the technology has evolved and people start implementing it or adopting it, you want to reach, as you mentioned before, interoperability among different asset classes or different applications or different ecosystems. And then, as Sumera mentioned before, in the technical part of those standards, it's really important to consider, what exactly you're going to bring along to where, and then have a proper way of doing it that it doesn't differ that much from, again, asset classes, industries, verticals, business lines, or whatever you may want to integrate with, right? You also need, for example, those standards to talk to the strategic systems that you may have in the back and you want to connect towards. And we found out, for example, top 5 were indeed in the verticals, in the security, Internet of Things, identity and requirements of what you need to consider. And we also found, for example, specific gaps where we saw that there need to be more work around that. And it was, for example, on understanding when do you actually have to apply DLT. For example, what kind of technology you're going to choose, what kind of consensus algorithm are you going to choose, what kind of algorithms are you going to connect to those specific parts of the technology that you're going to digitize. And interoperability. For example, performance was as well a really good one, because you need different scalability, performance, integrity, and confidentiality, depending, again, on the asset that you are moving along the chain. And last but not least, the vertical, because each vertical has its own regulation, its own wording, its own, specificities that you really also need to consider when you're developing this standard.
So thank you so much for that. It's everything from, consensus around the taxonomy all the way through to a complaint I heard from another large bank, global bank, which was performance metrics around blockchains, depending on what you're looking for. How do you know which blockchain performs X versus the business requirements that you have versus Y? And there's just no metrics, standards, just, it's still very nascent. And so we don't want to be negative here, but we have a lot of work to do as a community.
Indeed, as you mentioned, I have different requirements that I need to comply with in order to go to production, right? And those requirements depend on the asset class. So you have confidentiality, integrity, you have the performance and availability actually. And it's not the same, if you have an asset that moves, maybe once or twice a day, like for example, providing a mortgage to someone, then
Right.
you don't really need an availability of, having a lot of transaction throughput. But if you're talking about payments, if you're talking about, for example, financial markets, if you're talking about, a specific type of trading, then you may wanna check those standards in performance, check the latency, check, for example, what kind of confidentiality are you gonna need along the assets and along the chain as well, because you don't wanna disclose information that you may wanna hold on to yourself to allow for competition, to allow for, protection of your suppliers, etc. So what we normally do is we look first at the requirements of the asset class that you are going to move or you are going to digitize, and then depending on those requirements is the technology that we choose. So we're technology agnostic, and we go around it that way. It's first what's the problem that you are solving, what exactly do you want to do with it, and then you choose actually how and then why and what, right?
Great. Thank you so much. And Samayda, I know we lost you for a little while there, so Mariana jumped in, but are there any sort of other trends or things that you want to tease out about the report? I think every single person in the community, whether they're technical or not, should take a look at this report, because it does highlight a number of things that we still need to do and gaps that need to be filled. And frankly, any willing body out there who has the ability to do it should step in and fill that gap. Because one of the things that we will be doing in these reports is actually identifying some of the gaps that still need to be addressed. As well as conflicts. Lawrence, I'm going to go back to you. I think we've lost Samayda again. We've done a lot of work. You guys have done a tremendous amount of work. There are places where we have not really touched upon. So I'll give you guys a teaser. We did touch upon taxation standards in the report for legal and regulatory, but we don't cover, for example, insurance. I think there's so much more we're going to need to build out. When you think about, Lawrence, some of the critical areas, I think custody is one. How is the stuff safeguarded? What are some of the other elements in your mind, really from also a financial services standpoint, would be critical for us to normalize or find a consensus around?
Well, that's one of the best questions anyone's asked me for the past few weeks, Sandra. I mean, if we just focus on financial services verticals, either driven by consumer or counterparty adoption, I think the whole area of stable coins right through to CBDCs, and I think the early stage of CBDCs is that it is purely going to be in the institutional space, while folks like Libra will certainly focus on stable coins or on their own multi-jurisdictional or global coin for remittances. So I think as we see those sort of payment solutions come up, and particularly on the retail end, where they converge with open finance are increasingly important. And again, the consumer aspects around those standards, not least of which has been mentioned already, the technical standards. And I do really think that drives all of the back-end things that you were mentioning, accounting standards, tax standards, anything around valuation standards, but really more of the back-end, finance and governance processes in the ecosystem. So most definitely staking, I think, and what we're seeing in DeFi, if you blow away the hype, but staking, particularly as a commercial vehicle for an investor to put money into a product and get, again, a better return or a risk-adjusted return than other asset classes they might put their money into, is becoming really big, as is DeFi lending. And I think the regulators have focused on this. So those are the two areas that I think are probably the biggest trending topics that we've seen in the community, but not, not to the detriment of the other areas. I mean, I always call custody and the CSD stuff, like the SDX guys are working on, really is almost the Gordian knot of digital assets, particularly if we get to asset tokens, and fairly complex transactions, probably more on the counterparty side of things. So I think watching that, and then the last bit would be back to cryptocurrencies, particularly where and probably Sandra closer to your all stopping ground, where we've got the derivatives of the derivatives market is really 60% of the spot market in recent estimates. And that's important. I mean, that's probably closer to my world, Sandra, closer to your previous world. That really is an indication that we've got a different set of market entrants coming in and playing. So I'll just co-join that with one more thing. I think the point that folks make about the technical standards is pretty important. GDF had the privilege of coming together with the Chamber of Digital Commerce and IDAXA, two other big associations, to work on a technical data payload standard for the FATF travel rule. The independent team did it in 18 weeks with about 130 global VASPs or exchanges. I mean, I was blown away by it. But I think that level of technical infrastructure, whether you're in DeFi or whether you're in enterprise blockchain, and some of the issues, in fact, I always think of the adoption point. You're sitting on production systems, you've got real clients, you've got a series of performance requirements that go beyond regulatory requirements, or particularly if you're in the derivatives market, you need to meet those sort of requirements. And that is probably one of the biggest gaps I think we've seen. So even with the adoption, the upcoming adoption of the travel rule, all of the technical nuances and issues around the technical service providers and what they're having to do to meet those requirements is certainly a big space to watch. So I appreciate that was quite a bit, but I would just echo your point where there's tons of work to do. So it does really require a team effort to come together to solve these sort of things.
Yeah, and I'm going to iterate again that even though this core group of partners have started the work, there's open opportunity for many other organizations who are ready to roll up their sleeves and help either build bridges, fill the gaps, do whatever it is that we need to do, work out the conflicts. This is an open group project, so please reach out if you are interested. And I'm going to, we only have a few minutes left, but I want to give Samayda a few last words, but I want to also just give also Ben and Justin a couple last words. Ben, particularly with the fact that you are highly regulated, and actually Mariana too, but you do know how to operate with regulators in mind and compliance in mind. We think this is going to be critical, getting it out to governments and regulators to know that there is actually one place. Because one of the complaints I've heard is there's just, where do they go? There's just so many groups. There's so many different initiatives. And that fragmentation is actually really hard for them. So Ben, please, just a word or two.
Tough question to answer off the bat, but what we will say is speak with us. This is a little sales pitch for everyone listening. Organizations that are pushing the digital asset space, it's really going to be dependent on the assets that you're pushing out. What people try to do, and what we've seen lots of organizations do, is group all the digital asset efforts into one bucket, usually towards the innovation side, and say that's the sandbox in which they play in. This is such a core factor to so many key business lines of the institutions that separating it and understanding the business value, the commercial value, and the regulatory path to get this into market of whatever asset or project that you're looking on, the answers to that will become very clear. And so in our world, if you're looking for the digital asset exchange, if you're looking for to get access to liquidity, if you're looking to bring that asset into market in issuances for digital bonds, equities, private placements, those type of projects, then you'd look to an exchange such as SDX. If it's a crypto function, you would directly look with either that's liquidity pools or private liquidity, or you'd go to the digital asset exchanges that focus purely on crypto, the Binances and Geminis of the world. There's a clear differentiation factor of that. And with that, we hope that on the institutional side, and I'll finish with this on the GSMI effort, that we hope that the efforts of standardization that GSMI will hopefully pioneer forward will be able to allow an ease of access and transition of all of those siloed projects and efforts towards simplified forms that will then get directed to the correct institutions that will give them the global access and the global stage that these assets need and will ultimately attain.
I appreciate that. And frankly, I don't think we can thank you guys enough, these institutions like SDX and ING and Accenture, for the fact that you are for-profit entities that have a lot of competing priorities, and frankly, you've decided to lead in this space to actually help the community. And this is open. I mean, it's free. We're not charging for this. This is not proprietary information. Samayda, I mean, ultimately, we are starting the baseline, but we have a lot to do. Any parting thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, like you said, this is the starting point. We want people to now use this as a tool to think strategically about their engagement and how we structure these conversations going forward. We hope that, this is a tool for rethinking the way that we're working on these things and hopefully creating a system that's more coordinated, more representative, and ensuring that we're really advancing the work in a responsible manner that's understandable to private sector and public sector alike, because that's really what's ultimately going to drive responsible adoption.
Great. Well, thank you. And like I said, they're very strict here, and I've already gone over a minute, so I'm going to get in trouble. Justin, anyone who wants to reach out around business consortia, please reach out to Justin at Accenture, or reach out to us, and we'll make sure it gets routed. And again, you've got some amazing institutions here, powerhouses who are leading the path. And I thank you very much for that and your time. And watch for the mid-October announcement of the launch of not only the reports, but the various landing pages so that you can access the data set and interactive map. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.